안녕하십니까?
Good afternoon. Organized by NRC and sponsored by Korea Research Institute for Human Settlement, we're now going to start the session on post-COVID-19, its impact on international cooperation in the urban and regional planning. My name is Haeyeon An of the CRIS. In this conference, we'll be discussing about international cooperation and also about the ways that we can promote soft power in Korea. In this CRIS conference, we'll be talking about the international cooperation in the urban and regional planning and discuss about future policy directions for international development and cooperation. We have prepared many presentations in this regard, and many people from government, academia, and private sector will be participating in the panel discussion session. I would like to ask you to stay until the very end of the program for this meaningful event. The event will be carried out in both Korean and in English, and there will be simultaneous interpretation provided for Korean and English. And you will be able to see the conference live streamed through the web channels, both in Korean and English. And in consideration of COVID situation, we'll be holding this conference in a hybrid mode in both online and offline. And we are complying with the disease prevention measures. We will now begin the official conference. As the first speaker, we would like to invite President Hyun-Soo Kang of CRIS. Please welcome him with a big hand.
안녕하십니까?
Good afternoon. I'm the president of Korea Research Institute for Human Settlement, Hyun-Soo Kang. Despite a very challenging time because of COVID-19, I would like to thank everyone for taking the time out of their busy schedule. I'd also like to thank everyone joining us through an online channel. GKC 2021's topic for CRIS is on COVID-19, its impact on international cooperation in the urban and regional planning and development. First of all, I would like to thank President Hae Gu-jung of NRC for organizing this event, and I would like to thank Mr. Jae-young Choi from Office of Prime Minister and Director General for Development Evaluation and Management to participate in person. I would also like to thank Director Sang-gun Lee of CRIS and chair of today's panel discussion. And I would also like to thank our presenters, Yeon-woo Jung, research fellow with CRIS, and also Mr. Jong Jun-won, manager of KOICA, and also Associate Fellow Researcher Yoon Hae-jung, Yeon An, and Sora An of CRIS for presenting in this event. I would also like to thank our panelists, Kong Myo-oh of MOLIT and Mr. Yul Kwon of Kiev, as well as Mr. Kwang-bok Lee of KIND, as well as Kyung-hoon Cho, principal of OCS, for participating in this event. I would also like to extend a GDPC researchers for making this event possible. As you all know, COVID-19 has disrupted our day-to-day life. In addition to that, it has created new order in many different areas in our lives. It's been almost 2 years since the outbreak of COVID-19, and the world is now moving toward with Corona era, not putting behind a complete end to the COVID-19. And the new order requires us of the changed value and standard. It is same for in the area of international development and cooperation. We are looking back in the past cooperation that focused on economic growth, and we're discussing various values that has been neglected before. Especially international community is now using this opportunity brought on by COVID-19 to respond to climate change and sustainable in building sustainable society. UN is emphasizing more cleaner, environmentally friendly, and healthier and safer and more flexible recovery plan for COVID-19, which will focus focus on human and Mother Earth. Our government is also developing strategy in the third International Cooperation Basic Plan, as well as Green New Deal ODA strategy, as well as International Development Cooperation strategy, to proactively participating in realizing global value in the world community. Amidst such situation, it is timely to redefine the overall direction for international cooperation and development in the areas of urban and regional planning. In this conference, we'll be discussing about key strategy of core institutions in the area of development and cooperation for urban, regional, and planning. And these discussions and research results will provide a new milestone, I hope, in the future direction for international cooperation in this area. We believe that we will be able to have diverse and productive discussion that will serve as a turning point for research, international development in the areas of urban and regional planning. And Chris will work closely with relevant institutions to continue to contribute to the study and to work together with global institutions. Following our effort last year, due to COVID-19, we were unable to invite many participants, and we're having hybrid mode of conference. I hope that next year we will be able to invite more people to have a meal together and to have a night out together. And we hope to have a conference where we can be together. Thank you for listening.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Kang, for those remarks. Next, I would like to invite Mr. Chae-Young-Che, who is Director General for Development Evaluation and Management from the Office for Government Policy Coordination, for his congratulatory remarks. Good afternoon. It is a pleasure to meet all of you in such a beautiful season. I would like to thank President Kang and also Mr. Sang-gon Lee, Director of GDPC of KRISH, for inviting me to this important event. Territorial land and cities are very important because this is where we live, and our descendants will be living in this territorial land as well. In the past, we carried out balanced planning for our cities and our territorial land, and we wanted to provide an enriched environment for all those living on the globe. However, 2.2 billion people on Earth lack clean water, according to a UN report issued in May, and many people suffer because of lack of electricity and so forth. So if you think about the pandemic, it is actually acting as an obstacle for political stability and governance in many developing countries. And most confirmed cases of COVID-19 are occurring in cities, and many are saying that urbanization may actually slow down in the future. However, historically, cities flourished in the aftermath of infectious diseases, and I am certain that cities will stand strong in the post-corona era. Climate change and COVID-19 health crisis brought new challenges to all of us, and now we are trying to get back to our daily lives before the pandemic. And we have the US and China saying that they will be investing hugely in global projects. And these advanced nations have capital. And they're saying that there will be more investment because of the pandemic into smart and IT systems in the future. However, the situation in the developed nations are quite different. According to a recent UN report, COVID-19 COVID-19 actually hurts the access to cities and also safety and transport systems of the cities. And actually, the vulnerable group are hit even harder. And so we must carry out flexible and inclusive programs for the underprivileged. So what do we need to work on? We need to work on our infrastructure and development policies, and we have to employ a strategic approach taking into consideration the SDGs. And we have the NDCs of 160 countries, and 90% of these countries have plans that have to do with urban planning. And the pandemic is actually posing a threat to these plans, and we have to be eco-friendly when we invest in infrastructure. So rather than developing and creating infrastructure, we actually have to coexist and be in harmony with nature. And once we implement infrastructure, it will last for decades. So we have to think in the long term and think about the entire life cycle of the infrastructure, and we have to think about the impact of building such infrastructure and carry out a benefit cost analysis. Also, we're working with developing nations, so we have to work on enhancing the residents' well-being and also the human rights of the people. Also, because of the pandemic, ODA budget may shrink in many nations. However, we need to have productivity. We need to think about the feasibility of these projects and think about cost effectiveness as we carry out valuation of these projects. We are now slowly getting back to our daily lives before the pandemic. However, the daily life in the future will be different from the pre-corona era, and we will be faced with a different environment and new challenges. And we need to seek land use and urban planning projects that befit the changing condition. And so I hope that you will find today's seminar informative and rewarding for all of you. Thank you. Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Che, for those remarks. Before we begin our program, we would like to take a few minutes for a photo session. I would like to invite members from the hosting organization and also the presenters and the panelists. Please remember to wear your mask. We are trying to abide by all the quarantine rules.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you. From now on, we will now begin the presentation for the conference. First, we would like to invite Yuni Chang, Associate Research Fellow from CRIS, to talk about the changing environment and challenges going forward in the areas of land and urban planning post-COVID era. Good afternoon. My name is Yoon Jung, the first presenter for this session. Today, I would like to talk about the changing environment and challenges going forward for international cooperation for regional and urban planning post-COVID era. This is my agenda. We would like to talk about the impact of COVID-19 in international cooperation, and we'll talk about the COVID-19 response strategy based on advanced countries case as well as international organizations. And I would like to review the strategy of Korea in responding to COVID-19, and some of the challenging situations that we're facing in the front line would also be discussed. And last but not least, I would like to also end with a recommendation for the policy in the areas of urban and regional planning. COVID-19 outbreak has made us realize that we're living in a hyper-connected era. The virus from one region has spread fast around the world, and we have faced a crisis that require global response. In international cooperation, we have seen this COVID-19 as the most challenging crisis that require cooperation, and new globalization and crisis of international cooperation and multilateralism was raised. And it's been 20 months since the COVID-19, and we've had a phased recovery to the normal state. But when you look at the number of confirmed cases, the world seems to be still under the COVID-19 influence, and the importance of cooperation and multilateralism has increased. But there has been ever more severe competition between nationalism as well as competition between donors, and it seems that there has been heightened expectation on the mid-sized donor countries, and it has given us a very negative impact on domestic situation in terms of financial as well as in cooperation. In the early days, Korea had many confirmed cases, but we're now known as a country that responded to the pandemic most effectively. So the evaluation on soft power of Korea and the disease response in Korea has been very positive. We want to leverage this asset and legacy so that we can play an active role in overcoming the crisis. In 2021, our ODA budget has increased. And in post-COVID era, we need to review our strategy for ODA very carefully to implement this in the future. The Sustainable Development Goal, SDG, is an end goal that the world wants to pursue when it comes to international cooperation. According to SDG Goal Report 2020 by UN, COVID has had negative influence. It has brought a negative impact on balance, inequity, and climate, as well as economic status. And what we want to achieve ultimately is to alleviate inequality and also to alleviate poverty. In order to achieve this, we look at the potential of regional and urban planning. We want to have inclusive, safe, and resilient and sustainable city development, and that has become an important goal. As mentioned in the congratulatory remark, most of the disease outbreak took place in urban area, but a third of the population still live in slum areas. And COVID-19 has aggravated housing environment and increased the number of slum. There has been a news released by the UN, and this is not the first time or first pandemic that we're experiencing, but still we do not have the right measure to respond to this. And the city needs to play an important role in abating disease and climate, the crisis from climate change. And COVID-19 has heightened and stressed the importance of urban cities once again. And Korea not only is pursuing the national interest, but we're doing our best to contribute to SDG goal in building a sustainable society. And we have looked at how we're doing in terms of responding to COVID-19 in international organization and as an advanced donor country. But because I'm the first presenter and I only have 15 minutes, so I'm going to be very brief and fast. I'm not going to read through the details, but what I can say in common is that when you look at different areas, there's long-term and short-term support in healthcare and public health. And there is a diversified financing in healthcare, and there's also stress on cooperation. The resilience and disaster management of city is being emphasized because city has the critical role of recovering from this kind of crisis. In international organization, there is a separate document in supporting urban areas. OECD, UN Habitat, UNDP, World Bank, and ADB is emphasizing such strategies. What they're emphasizing in the urban area or in the areas of city is the following. They're emphasizing the public space and green spaces, and they're also stressing the resilience and the city's role as to respond to climate change. And as a partner for cooperation, there's this emphasis on the building capabilities of cities. This is something that Korea is strong in and where we can contribute. And if you look at the strategy of the leading countries in overcoming COVID-19, Germany and France is top 4 countries in providing donations around the world. The key is that they have each goal in providing this kind of support. And their focus is different across different countries. Some are expanding multilateralism, and there's also shifting budget to allocate in their key initiatives. Next, what is Korea doing when it comes to COVID-19 response policy? Let's look at what Korea is doing. Because we're talking about topics of urban planning and regional planning, let's just go over what we're doing in terms of ODA. And among ODA, urban and regional planning area is actually quite large. At one point, it reached about up to 37% in overall ODA, and it has slightly gone down, and mostly it goes into ground and sea transportation. We want to build stable area, and knowledge sharing and policy sharing ODA is relatively low in its proportion because it also requires a long-term commitment. We have passed the International Cooperation Act, and as such, we selected initiatives to provide humanitarian aid and also to lead effort to abate climate crisis. As you can see, the government has been diligently implementing required strategy in various fields. The ODA budget has increased by 3.8 percentage point, and there has been multilateral cooperation by different ministry within Korea. Under regional and urban planning, we have increased our ODA by tenfold, and we have identified new business, and the number of projects actually increased. And when you look at the different responses by MOLIT, we're supporting Korean construction companies to go abroad. That is, as you can see, one of the priority for Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transportation. There are different strategies, and the government is seeking to change and update different approaches and strategy. And how is it translated in the field, and how are we reflecting that in the actual initiatives? So I looked at how we are setting our policy direction based on what is happening in the front line. So I try to hear from what people are saying on the ground. So, and this section discusses about how the development projects were impacted in COVID-19 in the urban and regional planning area. This has been carried out for 4 months last year, and we looked at different stakeholders, including government, public institutions, private sector, and NGO. And we've actually carried out interviews, in-person interviews actually, and they invested the time to participate in this investment. And 91% said that there has been significant impact on their business from COVID-19. The negative impact, as you can see, is that there has been multiple negative impact from spread of COVID-19. The delay of business was about 78%, and the cancellation and withdrawal from the business was also very high, as you can see. The suspension and delay and cancellation of business has actually took place, and there has been difficulties in communication, and the leveraging of local resources was difficult, and they had actually transformed to non-face-to-face situation. There has been actually a lot of talk, so I have summarized key elements, although there are much more contents behind this. There are different phases. They had phases of new business development and coordination and business management and consequent and achievement evaluation. As you can see, there is uncertainties in the state of recipient countries. These are some of the quotes from our interviews and our discussions. While listening to the people on the ground, there were some of the difficulties that was unknown to us, and some of the issues were actually something that we couldn't anticipate. The need for strategic support from the government level was emphasized, and also developing a prospective area and providing complex and multiple program was needed in the city development, and developing new partnership was also needed. And non-face-to-face had some limitation, and lack of resources was also some of the problem that was stated. So the need for digital infrastructure support and on-the-ground support was also mentioned. And they also mentioned the difficulties of actually responding to the local situation, and it seems that we need to enhance the capabilities in the local market. Next is on the business management. There has been some difficulties that is innate to the urban and regional management, and Mr. Won will be also presenting on this. But in the areas of land and regional planning, it is very difficult to measure performance management using existing method. And especially in COVID-19, we need to review on how we need to manage business and performance. In order to improve this, we also need to improve the expert involvement, and we need to have diversified how we measure performance. Last but not least, what I also want to mention is that when you look at this changing environment, although we develop strategy according to changing environment, we do have a counterparty in our ODA country. So we have to be mindful of the uncertainties involved. The culture, political situation is all very different. That's why we need to develop a cooperation project that is in consideration of the ODA countries, and we have to develop a program that is integrated and develop strategy that is linked to the ODA countries' national long-term development strategy. As I have mentioned, we need to improve our policies, and that's what I want to end with. We need to have inclusive and long-term policy vision developed and link that with the high-level national strategy. In Korea, we have international development basic plan, but currently we do not have the land and regional planning as part of that goal. But we want to contribute to SDG more, as well as we believe urban and regional planning is an important area that we can contribute to in terms of achieving SDG and global objective, and we'll be able to contribute to the strategy. And once we have that strategy, we need to develop a plan that is based on select and focus, based on the policy vision in the land and city urban planning areas. I have looked into different initiatives that we can go into. We can work in to improve digital infrastructure. All these areas cannot be achieved with just one sector. All the relevant stakeholders need to make a common effort together and work in a concerted manner. And Chris, as an organization, is also making a lot of effort to contribute. I know my time is up. What I want to mention in closing is that there has been some criticism by NGO that we are pursuing some narrow strategy. And this strategy is based and focused only on those companies who want to go overseas. And that has been going on for some time. But we need to build a rationale for that. And I think when it comes to alleviating that criticism, I think the land and regional planning is an important area where we can actually contribute in helping these development goals. And I believe there is a much role that regional and urban planning can play. Thank you for listening. With that, I conclude my presentation.
부연구원님 감사합니다.
Thank you, Yoon Jung, for your presentation.
이어서 두 번째 주제
Next, the second presentation, which will be made by Ms. Horabang, who is Associate Research Fellow at KRISHS. She will talk to us about how to make win-win cooperation for national land and urban planning ODA. Good afternoon. My name is Horabang, and I work at the Korea Research Institute for Human Settlements. So Dr. Chung gave some concluding remarks, and I think that leads us, it's a very good segue into my talk. So I would like to talk about how to seek win-win cooperation for national land and urban planning ODA. And this is a research project that we carried out at our research institute, and we will be publishing the information shortly. And I will give you a brief presentation for about 15 minutes. So why do we need win-win cooperation? And secondly, what is the current status and what are the issues? And third topic, well, what are the overseas institutions dealing with this issue? And then fourthly, I would like to talk about some recommendations, 3 recommendations actually, for win-win cooperation when it comes to land-related ODA. So we talked about the pandemic, we talked about urbanization and more demand for urbanization in many nations, and I think that has already been explained. Now, we have the basic plan of Korea for ODA, and we emphasize the importance of mutual benefit and also win-win. And so, of course, the benefit that we receive would be the national interest. And then, of course, there are some benefits reaped by the partnering country. So when we provide ODA, we're developing that other nation's land and cities, and there will be results coming from that development. Well, what is the benefit for Korea then as a donor nation? Well, there is national interest because we can make inroads to overseas markets and we can win new business opportunities. And you may think that these expressions are very blatant, but actually we use these terms in our official reports and documents. And we have the third basic plan for ODA, and there is this very important axis of win-win cooperation or mutually beneficial cooperation. And of course, we have that overall goal of SDGs, and we are racing towards that goal. So what was the need for our research? We, of course, provide ODA because humanitarian needs, and of course, we want to seek the national interest of the donor country. But if we look at the overarching goal of our third basic ODA plan, we have win-win national benefit. So we need to bring about benefit for both parties. And we are using all these great phrases, but then do we actually have measures to back up these great words? And so, especially in the area of territorial land use and urban planning, we thought it would be a good idea to think about how we can achieve win-win cooperation in these areas. And so, I have the objective of our research here. And regarding win-win cooperation, well, I gave a lot of thought to this. We use this term a lot when we talk about the relationship between large conglomerates and the SMEs and many different entities. And there is some theoretical background. So we have a give and take and then giving back again kind of relationship. And there is a circulation of what is given and taken back. And this happens naturally in the market. So it's give and take and then give back. But there is a time difference. So we have to take that into consideration. And also we have to think about the other party's situation. And regarding win-win cooperation, we can think about these 4 characteristics. First, the relationship is multilateral and non-dependent. And secondly, all parties seek their own profit and benefit. However, there is a value add. There is a common benefit that can be sought after. And thirdly, we have to think in the long term, and we have to think about the importance of the process. And the fourth is that we need trust and solidarity. So accordingly, let's look at some global trends regarding win-win cooperation. And of course, we have major powers that are seeking their national interests, and there's a lot of talk about nationalism as well. And I cite the examples of Australia and the US as well. And when we talk about win-win, well, sometimes there's misunderstanding about the win-win ODA that we provide. And we're saying, well, maybe we're trying to smooth over the fact that we're seeking exclusive national interest as a donor country. However, this part is important, and the national profit or the benefit of the donor country is as important as the humanitarian objectives. And so that is why we have to come up with some sort of philosophy for win-win cooperation. And we need to strike a balance between the benefits that is enjoyed by the 2 parties. So in this study, I thought of 3 direction points for mutually beneficial cooperation. So there has to be respect among the parties. And secondly, we need to have a long-term integrated approach. And the third part will be to seek universality that will improve the global condition and environment. Next, I would like to talk about the current status of land and city-related ODA and some issues. So here we have some 4 basic plans that we need to carry out, and we also have CPSs. And actually, where does the land and urban planning ODA lie in this framework? That is rather unclear. There are these big themes, traffic, environment protection, and so forth. But in which category does land use and urban planning ODA go into? That is rather unclear. And so we have these different areas, about 10 of them, but we're not able to see the forest or the larger picture of developing the entire territorial land. So how have we been doing this in the past? In about 10 years, in the first and second round of our ODA plans, well, you can see that they were in the format of mostly grants. And also, urbanization was not a buzzword at this time. And we provided not consulting or development plans, but a lot of the aid was physical. And here we have ODA and non-ODA, and also the consulting and also investment and development. And you can see that many different parties come into play, and that brings about the criticism that the efforts are fragmented. However, we have this huge space, the territorial land in the partnering nation, and even when many entities go into that large area and work on these numerous projects, we need to have a comprehensive view, and we need to string our efforts together and tie everything together. So based on that current status, there are some three directions that we have to go forwards. So first of all, we need to carry out projects that actually help the receiving country. And we need to carry out projects that fit the strategy and initiative of the local community. Also, we need to come up with a long-term and integrated approach. And thirdly, when we establish ODA, we need to have that perspective of having sustainability, and we have to seek the public good. Next, I would like to talk about some foreign institutes and how they carry this out. So first of all, we have the Japanese case. They have JICA is doing a very good job. And as you can see here, they have something called a urban regional development, and they have had this development plan for decades, and they came up with a guideline for urban regional development in 2017, and it includes disaster management, for example, and these advantages are pointed out to the recipient countries, and everything inside the guideline are in metaphors, and you can see that many different elements are included, and it's a very comprehensive guideline. The second example would be Australia. And Australia is an important player in terms of ODA in the Asian region. And Australia is working hard on building smart cities. And we have something similar. However, what Australia is doing is not project-based, and they are focusing on ASEAN as a whole. And under MPAC 2025, Australia is supporting urban strategies for sustainable cities. And also, the Australian government is working with the ADB as well. And so they are investing in the long term, and they are able to back up their initial projects with follow-up projects. And this is the ADB. And they have this framework that I just showed you. And the World Bank has a framework that is quite similar to that of ADB. They have something called the GPSC. And there is exchange in terms of planning, financing, and measuring. And so from these overseas examples, in terms of respecting the partnering country, well, we need to think about projects that we can work with the receiving country or the partnering country. And also, we need to work with the local autonomous governments when it comes to regional development. So we need to have multiple viewpoints when it comes to ODA. And in terms of long-term and integrated approach, well, there has to be a good match between our foreign policies and ODA. So we should rethink our ODA and think about how much they match with our new northern and southern policies. Lastly, I would like to talk about some recommendations. So I talked about 3 goals that we should aim for. And we need an integrated approach so that we can develop the space that this partner country has. And so, first, we need an integrated strategy guideline. So we have the ODA framework for territorial land and urban cities, and also we have the CPS of Korea. So we need to be comprehensive, and we have the Office of Government Policy Coordination. And when we think about urban planning and regional development, this is where we can really make a difference and carry out a comprehensive development of the partnering country. And based on that, we can come up with regional programs. And we talk about converged programs, and there are many directions for ODA from that perspective. So if we're focusing on regional development, well, there are many areas in there, and we can have the private sector participate and take part into the overall framework. And to do that, of course, we need to establish a master plan for the said region, and also we need to seek participation from the private sector, and we must do this from the very beginning. And thirdly, well, we have lots of information, and we need integrated governance and partnership in order to gather such information together. In Korea, we have so many institutes and agencies, and we had very fragmented programs in the past, and we have been carrying out these separate programs by all these different agencies for a very long time. So we need to take inventory of all these projects, and we have to make efforts in order to link these programs together. So we need to have some sort of platform or source to do that. And I believe that KRISH can provide such a platform and have a very independent stance as it does that. And we can establish data based on GIS. And we can have the private sector and the public sector who wishes to participate in the relevant ODAs, and we can utilize this platform. So this is an example. This is ASEAN region, and this is ODA that has to do with disaster management. And the map marked in red are the disaster-prone areas. And so if we were to carry out disaster management ODA, we should be working in these areas. However, what are we doing? We're working in these areas marked pink. And so there is a mismatch of the need and demand of the region versus what we're actually doing. So I think we need to make an improvement there in the future. So my last slide, conclusions. This is the expected effect of my research, and you can read that off the slide. And then there are limitations to this research. We have overseas construction work that will be part of the ODA, and I believe that we need further research on these construction opportunities. And on the right, you can see the impact of investment in CRE, or construction and real estate. And so when we think about our infrastructure and our construction opportunities, it will be not just for the national benefit, but it will be good for the entire world as well. Thank you. Yes, thank you very much.
Next, we would like to invite Yeonu Jung, Senior Researcher with LH Housing and Land Institute. Please welcome him with a big hand. Good afternoon. My name is Chung-Yu Yeon, the Research Fellow at Land and Housing Institute. I am the third presenter for this session. The topic of my talk is on the cooperation strategy for overseas urban development. LH is actually the developer for overseas urban projects. In our company, we do smart city and overseas industrial complex. And based on our experience in developing urban area, we have worked with many public institutions and private companies, and also multinational banks, as well as international organizations. So I would like to share with you how we're working with different organizations and how we can improve our mode of cooperation going forward. So this is the current trend and the background of the current situation. When you look at the project backlog, number of projects has decreased and we have not recovered to the previous state yet. In order to recover from decreasing number of projects, the government is pursuing many different policies. Currently, we have over 90% of the project, which is the outsourcing projects and construction projects. We want to focus on investment and development project, which has a very high value addedness, and we also want to share that profit and gain with the private sector. On July 5th of 2021, the government has announced ways to enhance overseas project and win more overseas project. This requires capability building in both private and public sector. And for the public sector, rather than trying to go after the bidding to win the project, we need to expand our role to actually become an investor. We have presenter from KIND or panelists from KIND, but we also need to provide support for financing to private sector to carry out projects. So enhancing project management capability is also needed. So what is the outlook for urban development and infrastructure demand going forward? I'm going to share some of the outlook and numbers from the international organization. The increasing number of projects is coming from population growth. The pink one is coming from emerging countries. By 2050, we believe out of total of 9.7 billion population, the emerging countries will have about 8.4 billion populations. Africa and Asia's emerging countries will lead population growth. The urbanization is currently about 55%, and by 2050, the urbanization rate will exceed 68.5%. As you can see in the graph, this is the outlook for global urban population. And of course, accordingly, the urban development demand will rise as more cities are developed. There has been already extensive mention by my previous speakers about among SDG goals, the goal 11 is regarding urbanization. In order to achieve goal number 11, the required budget is about $38 trillion. In order to achieve that, we need to look at environment and social and climate, environment, and intangible asset side is going to be considered. And also in global infrastructure demand, we believe that the overall investment demand will be up by 60%. Asia will be leading that investment demand, taking up over 60%. And we believe that the road-related demand will go up going forward. When you look at global infrastructure, the infrastructure investment demand is about $94 trillion. The actual investment is about 78 trillion won, looking at the current investment trend. So there is a gap of about $14 trillion, and in order to fill this gap, the government is going to proactively invite a private investment, PPI. And since 1990s, there has been continuous growth in PPI, leading up to today. This is one of the research that we have done. We carried out expert survey in July during the COVID era. We tried to anticipate the demand coming or the impact on COVID-19 on the demand. So was a decrease of demand, and there will be increased demand however, for fourth industrial revolution. When you look at different sector, with exception to ICT, there has been outlook that all the demand will go down in other areas. So it seems that ICT or IT will become an important pillar for growth, and we need to shift to smart city. At that time, we try to anticipate how long COVID-19 will prolong, and 65% responded that COVID-19 will be over by end of 2021. Next is on the current global business status and case study within LH Corporation. I'm going to focus on Myanmar and Vietnam. In LH, we have begun our first overseas project with Chongqing Industrial Complex. As we were integrated and merged with Land and Housing Corporation, we stopped this overseas investment in 2009, and now we have overseas investment business unit starting in 2016. We have 8 in industrial complex, urban development. We have 6 projects in urban development and 28 projects in smart city. As you can see on the right side, there has been a housing complex in 9 areas. We are now in the approval state where we study the initial feasibility study. For Myanmar, we had a groundbreaking ceremony last year for Myanmar. KMIC Industrial Complex is one of our key examples. And it is 28 kilometers away from Yangon, the downtown area. And this is where the Dilawa Seju is in. The goal is to develop into industrial complex, and in 2019 we established joint venture company, but there was a urgent situation taking place in Myanmar, so it was delayed. In order to enhance our public companies' situation, we are working jointly with a private sector in Vietnam, in Hueng province, to build an industrial complex. Last December, we have begun our first phase project, and our consortium from Korea won one of the projects. We're going to work with KOTRA and the Korean Human Resource Corporation and KIBO, as well as IBK Bank. And these institutions will form Team Korea to support domestic companies on the ground. In order to hedge political risk, we have purchased insurance premium from MIGA under World Bank. This is a success case that has exported packaged infrastructure of Japan. This is the case of Dilawa Special Economic Zone. JICA in 2011 implemented this project. As you see on the right side, JICA has developed Yangon urban area, including the Dilawa Special Economic Zone. And through providing aid, they are building infrastructure, and the local private company has won the development project. Next is the cooperation strategy for going to overseas market. This is a research that is being carried out in the last 3 years. Last year, although we are reviewing 50 different projects, however, there's a limit in terms of human resource and budget. So we need to select and focus on where we invest. So we selected key countries, including CPS select countries. We looked at which country we are investing into and which country we are reviewing. And we have carried out expert interviews and COICA, an international organization, and MDB are carrying out projects in different countries, and we, based on these countries' candidate list, we looked at 33 candidate market or candidate countries and looked at different urbanization level and the demand and economic development status to look into different markets where we can go into in different timeline. And this is the conclusion part. There are many different stakeholders when it comes to cooperation for overseas development. In order to achieve stable overseas business, we need to look into the financing, and also we also need to involve public companies to build a very robust partnership. We also need to work with the central government and municipal government in the overseas nations, and we also need to work with multinational companies and international organizations. And we also need to involve private sector from the business planning phase so that we can achieve joint go-to-market. This is one of the cases that was done jointly with the private sector, which is the case in Kuwait in building Abdullah New City. In May 2016, MOU was signed, and in April 2017, we have carried out the actual MP and detailed design contract. In the public sector side, we have looked at the different factors that is reflected in the business plan to sign MOU related to smart farm. And from the private sector, we have involved many private companies who has expertise in the end-to-end process in building new cities. Currently, about 20 companies are participating as a private sector players. Second is on cooperation with overseas organizations. This is something that we need to improve going forward. Through proactive networking with UN Habitat, we need to actively develop projects, and in order to enhance execution, we may need to leverage MDB loan, thus by building a collaboration platform. In my team, starting last year, we are carrying out this project. And this is one of the ways to cooperate with UN Habitat. Through providing the water cleaning technology in developing countries, we can receive carbon trading right or emission right, and we can also reinvest that gain as an ODA business to use that as a funding for the future urban development project. And UN Habitat is supporting government approval through CDM business, and that's where we're working together with UN Habitat. And in order to leverage MDB loan, the public companies in Korea need to play the role of PMC and CMC, and based on the credit that we have, or credit profile we have, we need to have more in-depth research to win loan from MDB. This is the overall collaboration strategy. I looked into 3 areas as a mid-term, long-term strategic direction. We need to develop a project that is in line with SDG goals. And we also need to develop a differentiated business model that is in line with local situation. Also, supporting private sector as a public institution is needed, and also joint go-to-market is also required, and to develop new business. and supporting this new business is needed. With that, I would like to conclude my presentation. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Yeonu Jung, for that presentation.
프로그램팀
Next, I would like to invite Mr. Jong Jun-won from the SDGs Program Management Team of KOICA. The title of his talk is KOICA's Midterm Strategies for Urban Planning. Good afternoon. I'm from KOICA. I work at the SDGs Program Management Team. My name is Jong Jun-won, and I'm in charge of urban planning at KOICA. And so today I would like to talk about KOICA's new midterm strategy for urban planning. So we're looking at year 2021 to 2025. So they are midterm plans. And so I would like to introduce you to KOICA and then talk about the support that we have provided in terms of urban planning, and then talk about the midterm strategy that I mentioned, and then talk about development cooperation projects for urban planning and regional planning. So KOICA is now celebrating its 30th anniversary, and our mission is contributing to the common prosperity and the promotion of world peace through inclusive mutual development cooperation, leaving no one behind. And our vision is to be an eminent global development cooperation organization to realize global values and create mutual prosperity. And one of the previous speakers have talked about win-win cooperation. And so in our mission, we include that concept of common prosperity, and that would mean win-win cooperation. And we were established in 1991. And at that time, we began with volunteer groups. And we started out very small. However, in the past 3 decades, we were able to expand our business to numerous projects, and we have humanitarian aid, we have training programs and innovation cooperation programs, and also we work on dealing with natural disasters as well. So we have a much richer program. So in the past 20 years, we actually gave aid or support that amounts to 678.6 billion won. And you can see the size of our budget. And of course, in the future, our budget will be even bigger than in the past. So at KOICA, we work on different areas: education, healthcare, public administration, environment and technology, forestry and agriculture, and emergency relief, and also others. And by working on these areas, we believe that we can make a very big impact in terms of ODA and also poverty reduction. And that is why that we have invested heavily in terms of education and healthcare. And relatively speaking, we made less support in terms of technology, environment, and energy. And so we have been working hard on areas that will have an impact on reduction of poverty. And by area, well, we want to think about the contribution of working in these areas to the SDGs. And so we wanted to make that link. And we have the 5 major tasks elected by the country, which includes education, healthcare, and the public administration. Now, economy takes up a larger part as we shifted from the Millennium Goals to the SDGs. And so that is why we have come up with midterm plans. We have 12 areas here. And we have the traditional areas, including education, but then we also include logistics and transport, and we have put in more details to these areas and have that midterm time period of 2021 to 2025. And this is called our third midterm plan, and the urban planning area is included in this third midterm strategy. And so as for our midterm strategy, I want to show you where it lies on this framework. This is a policy framework, and it looks a little bit complicated, but we need to do a good job of urban planning and regional development, ODA. And to do that, we have to come up with the right policies, right strategies, and the right projects. And even if we have great direction and strategies and policy, if this is not followed up with concrete and great projects, then nothing will happen. And that is why we take into consideration numerous strategies. So in terms of policy, we consider the agenda of the international society. And also, we consider the ODA policy of the Korean government and the policy of the partnering countries. And at the strategy level, we look at three things. So CPS areas by the government, and also our regional and our midterm strategy by region and area at KOICA, and also we have to consider our resources. And the CPSs are updated every 5 years, and it will differ by country, the renewal cycle. And so we have strategy at our side, but then there are strategies in the partnering country, and sometimes the timeline is not in sync. And so that is why we have the country program apart from the CPSs. And we follow the country program in order to discover projects to work on with a specific country. And of course, we have performance indicators in order to assess what we have been doing. Now, as for urban planning and regional development area, conventionally, it included the supply of water and waste management and so forth. However, when we talk about urban planning, we have something different in mind. So we have the new midterm strategy, and we want to have a very comprehensive perspective. And so starting from 1991, leading up to 2019, you can see that the support in the urban planning area was about 1.5%. If you look at the different projects, we had a big bulk in terms of development consulting. And then we had the Sdgs entering the picture, and that had an impact on our projects. And we have Asian countries where urbanization is happening very fast, so a lot of our support goes to these areas and countries. And the country that has received the most support is Vietnam. And what we supported them with is to establish a urban master plan for a comprehensive development of the territorial lands, and also establishing the GIS. And also we have plans to work on a smart city development support. So I have details on the projects that we carried out on this slide. And now I would like to talk about some examples. This is the city of Hue, which is in central Vietnam. And we came up with a master plan, detailed plans, and had a project for creating public space. So it was a pilot project to construct public space. As you can see here on this map, you can see that we supported Vietnam in terms of coming up with the master plan. And within Vietnam, we have Hanoi and Haiphong on the northern region, and we have Ho Chi Minh, Kwanto in the southern area, and then the central area we have Da Nang, which is quite big. So Hue is about 100 kilometers from Da Nang, and it is the second largest city in central Vietnam, or it has the goal of becoming the second biggest city in central Vietnam. And to meet that goal, well, we have to build infrastructure, and so the master plan had to include the necessary infrastructure to become that second largest city in central Vietnam. And also there's a river that crosses this city. And we have the ecosystem in this river, and we had a pilot project for this river. And there were many different project candidates, and about 2,500 residents actually voted for the project that is mostly needed. And they wanted pedestrian road alongside the river. We reflected that, and that is why we created this pedestrian walk that is about 400 meters long. And so here with this project, we emphasized the importance of public space, and we listened to what the citizens wanted, and we tried to reflect that in our project. And as you can see in the pictures, you can see what we created. And this is the nighttime. And you can see that many people use the pedestrian walk during the nighttime. And when we evaluate and assess our projects, we take into consideration how many people we impacted. So providing vaccines when it is most needed, that would be very important. And as we experienced the pandemic, we really felt that we need public space near your home. And we need space where citizens can enjoy a safe outing. And of course, we did not expect the pandemic. However, we were able to provide this very safe public space to the people who are experiencing difficulties of the pandemic. So in that sense, I think we touched many people and had a very good impact on many people, making this project very successful. And the next case, well, KOICA is actually focusing in central Vietnam because Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City, they are already very big cities, and they are mega cities. And so we need to consider the construction ability of the region, and we at KOICA think that we should focus on central Vietnam region because resources are probably limited in this region, and this region will have more and more importance in the future. And we need balanced development of the entire nation in Vietnam. So central Vietnam is very important. And we wanted to build on the results that we had in the city of Hue. And with that in mind, we are currently working on a project that will support the building of a smart city in 3 cities, Hue, Da Nang, and also Quang Nam. So here, the approach is not just for an individual city, but for this entire region. So that's the strategy that we have. Next, I would like to talk about the midterm plan that we have for urban planning at KOICA. And we took into consideration global trends, international society trends. And here I have a quote from Mr. Ki-moon Park, former Secretary General of the UN. And he mentioned this in another form, but he repeated his comment at the Future Consensus Forum in 2018. And he talked about the cause behind insustainability, and those would be the large firms, the large volume production, and mass consumption. And of course, the mega cities that were created as a result. And what he emphasizes that for sustainable development, we will have to win this fight in cities. And we need to create sustainable cities and also small and medium-sized cities that are sustainable. And so in the midterm, we have 3 goals or strategic goals. So first of all, there are many changes that are brought about because of technological development, and not many cities can take full advantage of these technologies. And so in our first goal, we want to support sustainable cities based on planning. And the second goal emphasizes the fact that urbanization can be beneficial to just a certain group in society, and we have to think about the marginalized people and those who are most vulnerable. And so KOICA emphasizes that no one should be left behind. And the third strategic goal, we have climate change challenges and also the pandemic, and we want to emphasize the resilience of cities. And we need to have a very integrated and comprehensive approach when it comes to urban development. And so this is the overall framework, and maybe I can explain the details during discussion. And these are some recommendations that I would like to make. So these are the tasks that we face when it comes to development and cooperation in the area of land development and urban planning. So we will be needing more aid, and the partnering countries will want better aid in the future. And to make all of that possible, we need global governance. And from that perspective, if all this works out, I'm sure that cities will be able to play the roles that they should be playing. So I talked about the numerous activities going on in KOICA, and I looked at the numerous areas where projects going on in KOICA. And at first, I thought urban planning and regional development was the most important, and just that was important. But then, as I look at the numerous projects carried out by KOICA, I believe that all areas are important. And so in the past, we thought urban planning and regional development was an emergent sector. But as Mr. Che has said during the congratulatory remark, well, after these infectious diseases, cities stood strong, and actually they flourished following an infection or a pandemic. So that remark was very impressive. And of course, it was pointed out that we lack a very comprehensive and integrated approach. So that's something that we really need to work on. And those of you who are with us today, I believe that we used the phrase Team Korea, but I think we should use the term Team Urban. And rather than thinking about the national interest of a specific country, I think we need to create cities that can be enjoyed by all. And that concludes my talk. Thank you. Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Won.
Our next speaker is actually myself. I'm going to present on the ODA direction in the area of regional and and urban planning. I know we're behind time. I've tried to make up for the time that we lost. We have focused on the land, but now we're focusing more on green and urban area in my presentation. This is my agenda. In the area of land and urban area, I would like to briefly talk about the need for ODA implementation. Green ODA is needed from an international community standpoint, and we had Rio Conference and Kyoto Protocol and Paris Conference. The issue of climate has been heightened more than ever, especially with COVID-19. Green recovery has become a very important topic to discuss. Green New Deal is actually an important means to lead the social transformation that is ever more required. Next is on the policy direction for climate change cooperation. The climate cooperation began in 2008, but the policy has been standstill afterward. But now Korea is now proactively pursuing Green New Deal ODA. Starting December 2020, we have announced the strategy for 2050 carbon neutral or carbon zero plan to mention Green New Deal ODA. And this January, we have announced Green New Deal as the main initiative in the third International Cooperation Basic Plan. And in July, we have announced a cross-ministerial Green New Deal ODA strategy. But unlike international community, we have actually had a lag in linking climate change with different agencies and government organizations, unlike the global communities. We need to look into the converged ODA contents, and urban and land development area is actually a great platform to realize Green New Deal ODA. Having said all that, when it comes to urban and land area, what is the need for Green ODA when it comes to land and urban? As I have mentioned, the Green ODA has been lagging behind to some extent, facing some barriers. But this can become a key policy directions, and also we can contribute to international agenda. And when you look at the land and urban area, you can easily link the ODA content with the international agenda of climate change. And there has been some fragmentation of different businesses and sectors when it comes to urban and city development, urban and land development. But that issue could be resolved by linking climate change with this issue. And COVID-19 is creating economic crisis, and Korea needs a medium to actually go into the international carbon market. Therefore, Green ODA can serve as a medium for Korea to go into the carbon market. Next is on the current state of climate change ODA here in Korea in the area of land and urban development. We have looked into OECD DAC average compared with Korea's donation amount. On the left side, we have the total climate change amount, and this is as marked as climate change abatement and alleviation. And when you look at these numbers, we are well below OECD average when it comes to the total value. But in terms of ratio, we do have somewhat at par ratio with other OECD countries, with some exception to climate change adaptation. Leveraging CRS code, we have looked into land and urban area only. Climate change alleviation had much gap, but as we focus on the land and urban area, the gap is even wider. This is our annual trend. Climate change alleviation is actually lower than the OECD average, and it has gotten worse. And I have discussed with the statistician on this number, but there has not been a mistake in the number, but the zero carbon agenda has been discussed in the international community, and we have developed more projects related to this area. That's why the number just surged after a certain point, because we have put more emphasis on climate change alleviation. As you can see, the volatility is actually very high. So there has been some gap year on year on the total ratio. When it comes to adaptation, we do have higher proportion than OECD average, but the fluctuation is actually very strong, as we have seen in the climate change alleviation. We have looked into the number in Korea, and we looked at the domestic ODA, and we looked at the area where there was a new marker. and divided the area into urban area versus non-urban area. As you can see, KOICA had the most number of projects when it comes to climate change alleviation. But in terms of dollar amount, I mean, what you see here is number of projects, but EDCF had more amount. I believe EDCF has more activities when it comes to climate change ODA activities. As you can see, this is the climate change ODA business. When it comes to new marker on climate change alleviation, there's not much number of project that is marked. Only 7% is marked for climate change alleviation. But when it comes to, and when you zoom into the land and urban area, the ratio goes up by twofold. So the land and urban area is actually more easier to link with the climate change initiatives. When it comes to climate change adaptation, the water-related projects and the disaster recovery or disaster management project is more relevant when it comes to the ODA marker. Now, I try to find challenges facing ODA areas looking into Korea's case. As you can see, we have came up with a green EDCF strategy. And looking at different project cases, I have tried to identify Green New Deal related projects. And I have sought after the project experts' view and carried out interviews. And the challenges are very similar to what was mentioned by my previous speakers. The projects are identified based on the demand, and unless you develop this project in close coordination with local entity, it is very difficult to develop the project. And it's very difficult to measure performance and outcome. But when you look at the donor countries, it's not easy to collect data to measure the consequences and outcome. And as for technology business, it's very difficult to secure sustainability. We also looked at KOICA's case. Mr. Won talked about the overall midterm strategy for KOICA's urban area, and there has been a climate-related plan that was developed. And I looked into green ODA-related project and identify some of the challenges. The content is somewhat similar. When you look into it, the government is focusing rather on quantitative goal, and there is somewhat potential for greenwashing in that end. And actually, when you look at different sectors, in order to link climate change into the green ODA, we need to think about enhancing capability in Korea. And next, looking at all the progress to date, I try to look into the future challenges facing green ODA projects. We need detailed contents and guideline, and we also need to diversify our project approach to win a demand-based business, and we also need to secure sustainability of green ODA business. Next is to look into the overseas cases to find key learnings and to understand implication to Korea's green ODA cases. I looked at two countries, Germany and Japan. Germany is a leading country in working toward ODA in climate areas. They have been doing this for some time, so that they have excellent networking, and the performance has been great. One of the key characteristics of these two countries is that they are closely linking and mainstreaming climate change into different projects. So they're doing urbanization based on responding to climate change. So climate change is linked to every element of urbanization and urban development. Next, I looked into UN Habitat and ADB. As for UN Habitat, Dr. Jang was already mentioning about this case. They are also linking carbon issue with their own initiative. And similarly, ADB is doing the similar activities. Next, I looked at NAMA facility and City CN. One is on the financial side and one is on the technology side. For NAMA utility, this can be linked to Korean New Deal effort, and for City CN, we can identify this demand on technology side. So one thing that we can look into is the information for policymaking, and there's also tools for understanding technology demand, or demand on the technology side. So we have looked into the SWOT areas and carried out SWOT analysis for Green ODA. And we need to lead international discussion on Green ODA. We are facing a very important time, and many are very favorable and open to Green ODA. And this is something that we can leverage to become a leading position in the Green ODA area. We also need to differentiate our Green ODA by providing tailored approach to donor countries. We have to tailor to different local situations. And next is on enhancing capability in Korea regarding Green ODA. We need to do capability building to smoothly and robustly carry out our project. And we also need to diversify partnerships and financial sources when it comes to urban and city areas. There are many different entities and stakeholders that we can work with, so we need to diversify our partner pools. I have come up with 8 initiatives based on the research I have done, but I cannot show you all of the initiatives because of the time constraint, so I'm going to show just one. One example is to link the Korean New Deal and to redefine the climate cooperation in the areas of ODA content development for land and urban development. We do get a lot of requests to share our experience in land and urban planning. What we can provide at the time is that we showed about how we were able to develop in a relatively short period of time, but most of it is focused on economic growth and economy. And in order to support that economic development, these are the projects that we've done in land and urban planning. So many of the projects that we do in urban and land planning was related to economic development, but there are different policies and different planned projects outside of this area as well. We need to go into that area and list up the projects that we've done. Only then we'll be able to have dialogue with international organizations, and we'll be able to then leverage these lists with our donor nations in developing some of the needs and projects that we can do jointly with the donor countries that we are investing into. With that, I would like to end my presentation. Thank you for listening. Following the presentation, I would like to carry out our panel discussion. I would like to invite our chair of our panelists. We have Kwon Yul, Deputy President of Kiev, and we have Mr. Kwang-bok Lee, Director of KIND, KIND. We have Kyung-won Jo, Principal of OCS, and we'd like to invite our panelists and our chair onto the stage for discussion.
네, 바로
We will now begin our panel discussion right away.
프로그램
When I plan for this conference session, I'm going to make sure that we give you more time. Without break, we're going into the panel discussion right away. I know we have a very tight schedule. And we're talking about a very important topic today under the COVID-19 and its impact on international cooperation in the urban and regional planning and development. We had 5 presentations. And in order to do our panel discussion, we have very important panelists joining us. We have Mr. Kong Myung-oh from MOLIT, and we have Dr. Yul Kwon
이광복
from Kiev, and we have Director Kwang-bok Lee from KIND,
게스
and we also have Mr. Cho from OCS. We only have 30 minutes. It's a very tight schedule, so
한 6분에서
I can give you about 6 to 7 minutes each, and I apologize for such a tight schedule. The order of discussion will start with Kiev, since
다시 한번 좀 포괄적으로
Dr. Yul Kwon has done such a research extensively within Kiev. And we also want to invite Director Kwang-bok Lee, who's carried out a lot of public projects to date, followed by Mr. Kyung-won Cho, to share with us some of the challenges and issues facing private sector. And we would like to end with the comment from Director Kong Myung-oh from MOLIT.
하겠습니다. 자, 그러면
So with that, I would like to start with Dr. Kwon.
네, 감사합니다. 저는 대외경제정책연구원의
Yes, good afternoon. I am Deputy President for Center for International Development Cooperation at Kiev. And so Kiev is the control tower for the Korea's ODA program, and KIE Kiev is heavily involved, and we're trying to come up with framework so that we can take our ODA projects to the next level. And during today's conference, we talked about urban planning and regional development, and we heard diverse views from the presenters. And in terms of territorial land and urban planning, well, in the 1990s, we called them brown ODA. And there was a lot of criticism about brown ODA projects because it hurt the environment. However, now we have to think about the public good, the public resources, and to think about the overall development of infrastructure and the country itself. And now we have to think about what comes after COVID-19. And I think that is why urban planning and regional development are emerging as very important issues. Now, we have covered many topics today, and the contents and which areas that we're going to support, these were the topics that were covered. However, I think we have to look at the big picture. And we have the implementation of the SDGs, and what is key there would be that we have different institutions trying to implement the SDGs. It's not just the government. We have the private sectors, we have different organizations and agencies, and we all have to cooperate with one another. And we also have to think about financing and how we provide that investment and support. So that is important. That's one point that I wanted to make. And the first thing that I want to say is that when it comes to ODA, well, as Dr. Pang has mentioned, we have to think in the longer term. We have to have a long-term perspective. So we think about international value and national interest, and oftentimes we think that the two are in conflict, and we try to seek a happy balance between the two. However, in my opinion, I think these two concepts should complement each other. So for enhancing international value, Well, we have to combine the national interests of the donor country and the needs of the recipient country. But we have to look at ODA in the long term. We should not be short-sighted and think about the short-term national interest. We need to think about international value and universal values. And when we look at it from that perspective, we will not fall into a dilemma. And of course, they use the wording win-win cooperation. And I believe that is possible if we think in the longer term. If we think in terms of midterm and long term, we will be seeking universal values at the international level. And that will create seed money. And our 5 major tasks, one of the important keywords would be the strategicness of ODA. And this strategy would not be to enhance our national interest, and it will be from a midterm and long term, so 4 or 5 years or a decade. And we must think of programs and frameworks that will be working in the longer term.
근데 지금 현재 우리의 이런 ODA 시행 기관
However, well, if we look at the institutes that carry out Korean ODA programs, they are numerous. And one key characteristic of our ODA projects would be decentralization. So we have 40 agencies carrying out these projects, and as for the project time frame, well, if we include all the smaller agencies that become involved, then I believe that we have about 100 agencies that are involved. And so I think we have to make a concerted effort, and we have to try to come up with a way to organize what we're doing and to have a more efficient and more integrated approach. So I think we need to find a way to do that. And currently, we are focusing on the links between projects, and we have to make these links stronger. And we're trying to come up with a framework to do that, but there are some structural issues. We have different institutes and agencies, and they are all working separately to come up with projects. And even if we try to make everything systematic, the projects at the downstream lose power. And these bigger organizations will focus on just the higher level projects. And that is why we're losing that strong link between and among the different projects. So that's a structural problem that we have. And how can we overcome this? I think there are different organizations and platforms that we can utilize. And of course, we have the Office for Government Policy Coordination that can perhaps come up with a consultative body so that our efforts will have more impact, and we can wrap our projects into a package that will have a midterm and longer term impact. So that is a problem that is that we are currently faced with, and we must solve urgently. And we have the Ministry of Land Infrastructure and Transport, and they have supported 45 billion won and 15 projects since 2018. And these projects have become huge, and they carry out numerous demonstration projects. And of course, there are training programs by invitation as well. And 20% were master plan project, and 70% were made up of individual projects. So the focus is on individual projects, and we said many things today during this session, but then we have to think about how we can back up our words with actions and changes. And so we need to make a shift towards something that's more strategic, and it's not happening. And as for development consulting, 60 cases happened. However, those projects, only about 5% were linked with other projects. So we have a master plan, and we come up with a master plan, but it's not being fully utilized by the developing nations. And so we should do detailed planning and feasibility studies for these master plans so that it will be useful to the developing nations. So from that context, we need to think about the real impact that these projects have.
그래서 이제 기술 협력과 자금 협력을
Now, regarding cooperation in terms of technology and investment, I think it is important for us to link the two at this point in time. And if all entities can link the two and carry out projects, that will be great. However, there are many agencies that have the technology but do not have the funding. So in some cases, a certain institute may have some technology that they want to provide and provide support to the developing nations, but it may require 50 billion won, for example, and they may not have that. And so we have real financial issues, which is even more important for the recipient country. And so we need to think about financing and the delivery, and we have to diversify this. And in terms of territorial land and urban planning, well, we have to work on huge infrastructure and costly infrastructure. So financing is all the more important. And of course, there is risk-taking when we do the financing. So we have to think about how we can share the risk.
사실상 정부가 지원을 하면서 이걸
And there is support by the government, but rather than providing subsidies and having the government just shouldering the burden, I think we need to have something that really works and that is beneficial to the partnering countries. And for that, we need to strengthen a strategic financing system, and we need more dialogue on this. So we're talking about green ODA and climate change and all that, and all of them are great topics. However, if that does not really link to actual projects and actual results, then the master plan will just end up being just that, just a plan, and no actions will follow. And we have the health crises, and we have the threat from climate change. And so that is why we have to come up with mixed financing and other creative ways of doing the financing. And we need to have different departments that engage in international cooperation. And unless we do that, we will not be able to have some uniform strategy coming out in the region of regional planning and urban development. So time is limited, and I think many topics were covered during the presentations, but I made several points, and I hope that these points can be further discussed and considered in the future. So I am representing Kiev when I make these comments, and I believe that other international organizations and international society have the same concerns. So I think we really need to have more discussion and seek a consensus. Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Kwon. You are an expert in this field, so you gave very comprehensive views as to how we can enhance international cooperation. So you provide us with a vision and problems with the current situation.
We are going to invite Director Kwang-bok Lee from KIND for his panel discussion.
예, 카인드 인프라 경제연구실
I am Kwang-bok Lee, Director of Overseas Infrastructure and Economic Research with KIND. I'm going to share with you how we are combining overseas project within KIND, and also want to give you my
인프라 도시개발 지원
view on how we can best support the overseas infrastructure. So we're actually developing overseas projects, and we make progress and support projects that is at a standstill, and that is our operation model. And in the process, the way we work with ODA is that from a business development phase, we leverage master plan and initial plan within ODA to come up with individual projects, and we work toward implementing those projects. And KIND, in that respect, work extensively with COICA, but we're different from COICA and KOICA and the Exim Bank, we are actually project-driven and business-driven. Rather than having the high-level direction, what we do is we work with the private sector, and when they express their intent to pursue certain project, and we work with companies, and that's why we do have some statistical numbers on the need and demand from the private company side to select project that we want to pursue. And we've linked our project with ODA, and one of the example is the southern new town within Vietnam. And in KOICA has developed a master plan in 2013, and we have developed some pilot project, and we replied pre-FS project. We did a pre-FS feasibility study, and MOLIT has updated the master plan afterward. And as an EIPP, we have done a southern new town infrastructure development for the adjacent area of the new town. There has been some support, but unfortunately, the situation in Myanmar is not good, so the project is at a standstill. But we were able to develop pilot projects based on the master plan. And as you know, Gayan Dam project was done in Indonesia. We were able to do a PPP project linking to the water development project. And we're working with K-Water, and we are participating in consortium to pursue this PPP project. And we do the affordable housing in the Philippines, and we're reviewing ways to jointly go into the project with the private sector in Korea. And we're leveraging KCT network to transfer Astete Airport transportation. And currently, we are looking into the smart city development project to further identify projects that we can go into. So we proactively engage in developing ODA project or business opportunity in these areas. In doing so, we have to consider not only tangible factors, but also intangible factors like the culture and the local situation. The overall city planning could be different from the situation in Korea, so thus we were not able to apply what we do here in Korea to these countries. So Green ODA, I believe, could be effective in this light because this is something that we can apply. So I would like to talk about two areas of improvement. We talked about fragmentation of ODA, but rather than calling it fragmentation, I want to emphasize the importance of building a one-stop shop within the government. In my team, we run Indonesian PPP, and we also run KCT network within our team. And there has been a public announcement by MOLIT in land ODA. I was preparing that together with LH Corporation. And in order to implement that plan, the Indonesian government needed to set up and run PMO organization. And we proposed setting up and supporting ODA to set up PMO within Indonesian government so that they can oversee overall project. And that could also spill over to linking other projects within MOLIT. In the process, KOICA was involved in other ODA project from Indonesia government. And KOICA came to know that we were doing EIPP with Indonesia. So the information is not readily available. So it would be great if we can have a one-stop shop to share information on the progress of different projects carried out by different Korean institutions. Second areas of improvement that I want to propose is that I would like to ask for research in these areas. I've met with Korea Exim Bank and also KOICA staff, and many say that they have too much work. And there has been an increase in ODAs in Korea. If I just mention EDCF projects, and when you develop EDCF project, and in the initial stage, there has been a lot of engagement with the local government, but now that has not been done, and the work has increased because the local government is no longer involved as extensively as before, and their workload has increased. As ODA amount increases, we would also like to understand how other donor nations had worked through this difficulties and challenges of having too much workload. It would be great to research into those topics. Thank you. Dr. Lee introduced KIND and also talked about the need for information platform and also to build a research area.
So next is Mr. Cho. Can you represent the private sector? Yes, my name is Kyung-Hoon Jo. I am from OCS. So there was a common keyword of all three presentations, and that would be city or urban. And we're discussing overseas investment and development and cooperation in the urban area, and we're trying to come up with direction and recommendations. So in relation to that, I would like to point out that urban planning can actually bring together national development plans. And we have policy plans and also actual business projects. And above all that, before all that, we have a void and we have to fill that void. And so how can we implement all this? Now, we have CPS by the different countries, and these would be regional partnership programs or strategies and urban partnership strategies. And when it comes to plans, of course, we need to consider the uniqueness of the relevant region. However, we have development investment efforts made by Korea, and in the past, our efforts were fragmented, and we need to have a more comprehensive approach, and I think we can all agree on that. And I listened to the presentation by Dr. Won, and I believe that the potential and the possibility is already there. So he talked about the example of the city of Hue in central Vietnam, and I believe these plans will be further upgraded, and the approach is not just for a specific city, but for the entire region. And in KOICA, they are envisioning a smart city valley that will be focusing on the entire region, not just a specific city. And so I see a lot of potential there. And when we look at these programs, usually they are in the units of separate projects, but now we have the possibility of looking at the entire region, not just the separate and individual projects. So I think that's very encouraging, and I think that's the right way to go. I could really agree with that direction. Now, we have the large framework, the policy and plans, and we need to be more systematic inside these plans and frameworks. And when we look at the project level, well, Dr. Chung, Yeonu Chung, during his talk, talked about economic zones or areas. And if we look at the Indo-China Peninsula, there were some envisioned pictures for that entire peninsula. So that transcended national boundaries and national borders. And so there was a grander strategy for that entire space. And of course, we have the economic areas or zones in Myanmar. And Dr. Chung has talked about the economic zone in the east. And it would be a corridor that links the east and west in this region, and that can be a very strategic region. And there is LH construction that began in 2019. There was cooperation that began with the local autonomous governments there. And at the World Smart City Expo, there were opportunities for cooperation for this project. So that's very encouraging as well. So we have the city level, the region level, and then the project level. And there are many opportunities that exist at these different levels. And many opportunities have existed in the past, and now we want to make a more integrated approach. Next, speaking from a private firm's perspective, we have this sandbox that is provided by the government. And we have this large platform, and we can do many different activities on this platform. And we will have different players, the private firms. And in the last presentation, the topic was green ODA. And we have ETS and reduction of CO2 emissions, and this is a very urgent issue that we face. This is not something that will come in the future or something that is very abstract. And so when we work on industrial complexes, well, we will have the RE100 industrial complex, and the firms that actually take place as established business in this complex will be working on carbon emissions reduction. So we're seeing that sort of trend at the global level, and these efforts should be linked to actual projects. And by doing this, I believe that we can have these private firms participate. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Cho. You were representing the private sector. So we have this platform provided by the government, and you talked about what we can do to encourage those private firms.
The last panel discussion will be carried out by Kong Myung-oh, Director of International Cooperation and Trade Division with MOLIT. Very nice to meet you all. My name is Kong Myung-oh of MOLIT. We have been discussing about international cooperation in the areas of urban and regional planning and development. We discussed about not only international cooperation, but also the areas of improvement for ODAs in urban and regional planning. And as you have mentioned, within MOLIT, we are providing different programs for developing countries in urbanization as well as transportation. As many rightfully pointed out, in ODA for transportation and land and infrastructure face a lot of limit. There's a lack of long-term strategy, as mentioned by Dr. Kwon, and also we also have lack of information sharing across different institutions and ministries. We also have top-down project initiatives, which is also a limitation that we need to overcome. In the November last year, we came up with a revised plan for ODA, and this year we have also devised the third basic plan for ODA provision, and that is at the stage of finalization. It will be confirmed and finalized within this week. In the plan, Chris and Dr. Kwon has gave a lot of feedback and input in the development of the basic plan. And as a result, I believe we'll be able to incorporate some of the solutions and improvement of the issues that we have discussed at this conference room. And all of you have more experience, and you probably know this very well, but a plan is just a starting point. It comes down to to actually execution to overcome all these issues. In the process, we have to endlessly work with different government stakeholders, and we have to work closely, work with the companies and government agencies, and we need continuous communication across different stakeholders. And our division oversees projects, and our team oversees cooperation with international organizations. We do have a committee within MOLIT, and we have private sector participation so that we can carry out communication. I have talked about the future direction of MOLIT and what we're doing, and I want to end with stating what I really was able to relate to. We had a presentation on the win-win projects, and we have Han-ASEAN Transportation Minister Conference every year, and we had that conference last week. And the 10 member states of ASEAN all said that there has been some environmental challenges that has aggravated due to COVID-19. And they needed cooperation from their partners, including, for instance, China. In order to overcome COVID-19, the ASEAN countries voiced that we need a joint effort to weather through these difficult times. There has been a lot of discussions around that. Especially ASEAN member countries wanted to learn about Korea's ICT areas, and they were aware of the Green New Deal initiatives, and they wanted more support and more cooperation in that Green New Deal areas. Climate change, of course, is an important area for cooperation, but we also need to work with these ASEAN member countries in areas that they have great need in. So if we were to approach these member countries with the areas that they need most support in, as we have discussed in today's conference, we believe we'll be able to create great synergy. Thank you. With that, I would like to end my comment. Thank you. We were able to hear that as a person who is overseeing the central government's effort in ODA planning, we were able to hear about the future plan and what the current plan is, and we were also able to hear about the recent Korea-ASEAN Transportation Ministries meeting and the implication from it. And we are about 10 minutes behind time, but we were able to end on schedule. But with that, do you have any question? I would like to accommodate some questions from the floor.
So any questions or comments from the floor to the panelists or the presenters? Anything from the president of KRIHS? No? I think we were able to learn a lot from the presentations and the comments made by the discussants. So I chaired this session, and of course I work at KRISH, and this year was very important for Korea. So we rose from the ashes of war, and we are officially now recognized as an advanced nation in just 70 years. So how was that possible? We had nothing in the past, but we had KDI, KRIS, KF, and we had these institutes with strong human resources, and we started with plans. And then we implemented the plans, and I think that is why we were able to succeed. And of course, in the past, our ODA size was rather small, and that is why our ODA efforts were rather fragmented. However, now the overall budget or the resources allocated for ODA is quite substantial. So I think we need to have a more comprehensive view, and we need to be more systematic. And of course, now we have a department in the OPM that will be discussing these issues and overcome these issues. And so especially when it comes to territorial land, regional planning and urban planning, well, this was very important in developing Korea. It was included in our second development plan and fourth development plan and so forth. So we come out with the plans, carry out implementation, and then we revisit the plans and we revise the plans. And so I think we have learned from that methodology, and we're not going overseas just to build a bridge for this other country. I think we need to teach them the lessons that we have learned and teach them the methodology that we have, so that in 2, 3, 4 decades, these partnering countries will be able to develop their country on their own. And I hope that what we discussed today will lay a foundation for such developments that I worked about, and I hope that these activities will take off in earnest in the post-corona era. So I want to thank the presenters and the discussants, and actually the congratulatory remark by Mr. Che was very impressive as well. And I want to thank our president for his remarks as well. So on that note, I would like to now conclude this session. I would like to thank all of you for paying attention and staying till the very end. Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Sang-gun Lee, and I want to thank the discussants, Mr. Yul Kwon, Mr. Kwang Bok Lee, Ms. Kong Myung-oh, and Mr. Kyung-hoon Cho. And I want to thank our President, Hyun-soo Kang, for staying till the very end. So with that, we would like to conclude today's program, and I want to thank all of you for attending and staying till the very end. So this concludes the KRISH session of Global Korea Convention. All of you who participated via YouTube, thank you very much. My name is Ye-hyun An, and I was glad to lead you through today's program.